Welcome to Inspirational Journeys, everyone. My name is Ann Harrison Barnes, and today I am pleased to introduce my guest, Kristi Bridges, who's not only an author, but she also runs her own podcast, and she has a YouTube and Facebook Live devotionals that she does for YouTube and Facebook. So, Kristi, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much, Ann. It's an honor to be on this show.
It's an honor to
Found me.
I'm sorry?
I'm really glad you found me.
I am glad. Actually, you found me through the Christian Writer Support Group. That's how we met initially.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And any Christian writers out there, I recommend that you join the group because there are some that already know the ropes, some that are still learning the ropes, and all that good stuff. But anyway, Kristi, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, sure. I'm actually a corporate trainer by day and a writer by night. Years ago, we had a big layoff, and I told God, I said, someday when I get laid off, if that happens, I would like to have a year's severance, a year where I could really build up, and then I'd like to write for a living. And I started then, that was probably 10 years ago, I started then scheduling one day a month to write, to get used to the feeling of having to be self-motivated and not having, customers constantly coming to me to make me work. And that progressed into songwriting for a few different bands. I was a singer-songwriter, and now in the last few years starting to write my own devotional series. So it's really neat what you can do when you realize it's just you and God, no matter who else you think you can rely on.
Right, you're right. But it does help to be, surround yourself with other writers, with people in your writing community, because you don't want to feel isolated. That's for sure.
So true. Writing is kind of lonely. And this last devotional that I came out with, I actually asked other people to be involved with me for that same reason, because I had spent a couple of years doing all kinds of stuff alone. Writing takes time, and you have to sit in front of a computer to do it, and you can't really have a conversation at the same time.
No.
The last year I invited 11 other authors 11 other people to write this book with me. Several of them had never written before, and it was really fun to help them walk through the process of sharing. We started with writing a letter to their younger self, writing a letter to their 18-year-old self so that they could connect with who they really were and what an 18-year-old would really need. And then I had them write a devotional based on something they wanted to share that would help those people who are facing a transition in life and wondering which way to go in an ocean of options, would help them hear God's voice and recognize who they were and realize that there's no trauma in their lives that God hasn't used to give them more skills and more power.
Wow, I've got a story to tell you about that. I was listening to an episode of your podcast, which we'll talk about more in depth later on, but I was listening to the two-part episode that you did with Jimmy John Soul.
Yes.
I don't know if I pronounced his name right, but anyway, and when you were talking about that, not only have I heard you talk about it, but I also heard mention of that as the writing action in one of the back episodes of the Right Minded podcast, which I love. That's a good podcast for writers. But anyway, and I actually, that Sunday afternoon, after I listened to that, I sat down and I wrote a letter to myself, to my younger self, not only about life, but about writing. Because I've been through some things in my life, which were pretty rough. I've been through some rough patches, and, it's like, if I knew then what I know now, kind of letter to myself, and what younger people can learn about trials they may face. So I did that, and then I also threw the challenge to my podcast listeners yesterday.
I heard that this afternoon, and I was so excited.
Right, I'm getting like my friend Jen Lowry now. and when she takes on a challenge, she has to throw it at her listeners. So I'm starting to do that myself.
I'm glad. We need that encouragement, and you share such interesting things on your podcast, and just little challenges like that will get people involved. They're not just hearers, but doers.
Right. And so that was the blessing that I got from it. So tell me, what inspired you to become a writer?
As soon as I learned how to read, the next year I realized that I could write my own stuff, and I would come home from school and tell my grandma, give me a topic. And she would say something like teddy bears, and I would end up usually not writing about teddy bears, but just having a little bit of input would get me started. And I've always liked to write, but I really wasn't clear what I wanted to write. I love fiction, but I haven't always been real persistent with finishing a story. I love music, and so that was totally my heart for several years. And then slowly, some of the authors that I've read really sparked in me, like Philip Yancey, just sparked in me this desire to say more than I could in a song. And I still love songwriting, but there's so much more I want to share. And then last year, discovering that I could use my thrill of teaching. I love teaching people. I could use that and get other people to also understand how fun it is to write what God has given them to share. That's just, it's opened up a whole new world for me. I love doing the writing, but I also really, really like helping other people see how much fun it is. And I want to do that more and more. I've actually started a few different projects to kind of help other people, kind of like you, where you tell people, hey, try this, and all of a sudden they discover the joy of writing that letter to themselves.
Yeah, and it can be eye-opening, and it can be you have to do a lot of soul searching for that. I'm going to ask you this question. Do you get inspired to, does some of your inspiration come through dreams?
I have the weirdest dreams. And so some of the fiction stories that I have actually include a little bit of things out of my dreams. But I also, I write them down in my journal when I have really strange dreams, because a lot of times you can figure out where you are mentally and spiritually because of a dream. And sometimes you can get clues as to what God wants to do through a dream. I had a dream about a house several years ago that was just this mansion. I walked in and someone had left all this gorgeous antique furniture, and downstairs there was all this room for entertainment, and I wanted to start a retreat center. Well, a few months later, I sat down with some friends downtown and opened one of the local magazines, and there was my house from my dream. Now, it was $1.5 million, and I didn't currently have that.
Wow. I know. It's
but, whatever God wants to do with that.
Exactly, and it may not be, and I have learned that even though you saw the house in your dream, that house may be symbolic of something else in your life.
Totally.
Because, I had a dream of my tiny house that my parents are building for me several times. But I've also had one time when I started my podcast, and I'm not trying to toot my own horn here, but I had this dream that I was taking short airplane rides. Somebody was sitting across from me talking about writing. Ooh. And I don't even remember what it was. And then a friend, and either my daughter or a friend of mine and I would get off the plane, go walk down the sidewalk, do something, fly back. Then we'd fly out again, go do something, fly back. And then I realized it had to do a lot to do with the podcast. My interviews like this one are going to be longer, but the solos are always going to be short.
That is a really neat symbolic relationship, because flying is usually symbolic of something you're really excited about or you feel good about. And houses actually, like for my dream, are often symbolic of what's going on inside of you. If you're happy in your house, then, and you feel at home, then you're expanding or feeling good about your life. And if you have a cluttered house in your dream, then you're feeling stressed. And so your flying thing is that makes so much sense, that it would be some creation that you're doing, that podcast,
Right.
where you're talking to people. That's great.
And my friend Jen, who has just who I just added to the group anyway, she suggested that Anchor was my airplane, and my solos would be short. And I'm like, that could very well be. But so, do you only write devotions, or have you done any fiction before?
I have some fiction stories that at the moment are unfinished, but I'm working with a novelist this year who has actually written a couple of books. And she and I are putting out a course with little workshops to help people write their own novels. And that's been really fun, because I have my teaching skills and she has her writing skills, her novel experience. And between the two of us, we've really had a good time helping people realize how many ideas are all around them, and then helping them use things like action and living scenery, living settings, things like that, to make those books move. It's been really fun.
Right. And doing the story structure, character development, and things like that, which I actually did. If you go back and look or listen to the older episodes, I actually did a couple podcasts, one on character development, excuse me, and one on symbolism as a character attributes.
Ooh, yeah.
Yeah, I did that because I did the research because I was doing the blog post to go with it. And so in the course that I took from Reedsy, there was just a little bit about symbolism. I'm like, okay, what does this mean? I don't understand it. So I ended up doing a bit of research, and then I ended up adding that. I had put 7 tips in the podcast, but then I realized it was 4 tips with 3 different attributes in one. So I ended up doing 4 tips on the blog post and still linking to the podcast.
Yep. Well, because it still ends up being that 7, which is a very symbolic number.
Right.
Idea, symbolism in your character development. I like that.
Yeah. So, and you also run a Write Your Own Devotional course, right?
Yes. I actually have a full-length course. One of the things that I discovered when I wrote the first devotional was how much time I spent learning and figuring things out about the publishing and marketing and promotion and book launch and all those other cogs in the wheel, when all I really thought about was writing. But you can spend a year writing something and then stick it in your hard drive and leave it there and nobody ever sees it. And I don't think
exactly.
that's a proper use of what God's given us. So I used a lot of energy learning and a lot of frustration. So I created a course on Thinkific where people it's like 30 or 33 videos, and they're short. They're all maybe 5-10 minutes at the most, discussions of the whole process, writing the devotionals, and picking your covers and setting up your business so that you can get paid for your devotional, all those little things that we need to know, doing, taxes, getting a way to receive payment, what kind of publisher you want, your book cover, the whole 9 yards, in little bite-sized pieces that people can do at their own pace, with a whole lot of worksheets and templates that you can use for logging the information that you need. It was really fun. We're doing the novel writing workshop a little differently because I think people sometimes need more individual attention.
Mm-hmm.
But the devotional writing course, I have 2 students that were actually part of the Option Ocean project who, when they were writing with me in Option Ocean, they realized they had so much more to say. And so they wanted to start writing their own books. And they're making some really good headway on the Share Your Wisdom Wisely devotional course.
Wow.
Yeah.
Because I've tried to write nonfiction. I tried to do the embracing the healing power of music, but I found that I was getting bogged down with the research. And I tried to do one about publishing your manuscript through Amazon, making it the more accessible way to do it. Because at the time, people were talking about they couldn't do this, they couldn't do that, which I found was ordering books on KDP is a nightmare for somebody who is blind using a screen reader, which that's another podcast in itself. But excuse me. But then I started. I mean, I could get the instructional part down as to how to do the publishing, but the story where I talk about my pitfalls and the things that I've had to deal with, and how I got started, kind of fell flat. So I ended up dropping that ball and focusing on the fiction.
You know, we each have our strengths. And if you actually, I've seen some of your story concepts, I would never have come up with, the girl who woke up after a surgery she didn't have in a hospital, like a hotel. I would never think of things like that. If you have the gift for coming up with stuff like that and making it a fully story where, it actually has an ending, and it's not just a description, which is where I sometimes, I either get stuck kind of in the middle of the plot, and so I think you should do what you're really driven to do, because other people can't.
Right. And I'll do like professional articles and blog posts and stuff like that for clients, but as far as writing a nonfiction book, forget it. That's not me.
Now, have you thought, because I have listened to your podcasts and you get some really interesting people on your podcast, and you end up in really informative discussions about technology or, different kinds of things. And I'm wondering, because I know that you transcribe some of those, I'm wondering if turning, you're such a good talker, if turning that into like an ebook or something would be more beneficial than sitting there trying to come up with, the boring stuff that, you have to sit there for hours and research and compile.
I hadn't even thought about that. You mean like the blog, like doing the blog posts when I do the tips, the writing tips, and
and turning those into an ebook or the Kindle, something that people can easily get, because you're so practical in your discussions and you're already talking about them with other people who understand. So having those transcribed into a book might be a great.
I mean, I can transcribe the audio from either my phone app or the website, but I don't know. I would have to talk to my guests to get the, especially with the tips that they've given, to get their permission to do that first.
I really bet I would totally love to see you use, anything that I had to offer, because you give good information out.
Right.
I wonder, I need to know, I'm really curious, because you have a Southern accent, just like I do.
Yeah.
What transcription program do you use? Because the one that I have does not speak Southern.
Mine doesn't either. I use dictation on my phone.
Really? And so it works for you.
And I have to edit. I use dictation and I type a lot of times. I don't really use like Dragon, naturally speaking. I don't use that because I'm more of a writer than a talker. Well, okay. I lied when I said that because I'm doing the podcast, but for long form stuff, I'm more of a writer than a talker for long form, unless I'm doing an interview. Now, if I'm doing a solo and I've got stuff written out in front of me and I'm doing like a tips and tricks kind of thing, like the character development, I want to do one on story structure and stuff like that. If I'm doing something like that, it may be a little longer. I think my longest short solo was like 30 minutes. But usually my solos, sometimes if I have like 2 or 3 things, I break them up and put my little ads in there. Or if I
Mm-hmm.
can finally get sponsorships, I put them in there. But to kind of break things up a bit. But no, when I do text or I write notes, sometimes I'll dictate into my phone. I'll have to edit later. But I usually do a lot more. I'm faster when I type. There are people who use like dictation software, but not me. Not on a long basis, no.
I thought maybe you had found the one type of transcription software that did a good job with our voices.
No.
Hey,
No. That's like
one
text to speech.
find that.
That's like text to speech software that tries to pronounce Southern words. It ain't happening.
No.
It ain't happening. You just, Okay, so I have started Option Ocean. Ooh,
Okay.
and I love how you do the zone check. So, what inspired you to come up with the zone checks for day 3?
There's a neat book that I read called The Big Leap. And The Big Leap was by a guy named Gay Hendricks. And it was a fascinating book, but the biggest concept that I got from that was this zone of genius. He was talking about how there's a sweet spot between where our talents are and what keeps us motivated. Because, for example, you and I both like to write, but there are some things that we would just be miserable writing all day, and so there's talent, but then there's also motivation. And he talked about living in that sweet spot where you delegate the things that don't serve you, that don't keep you excited about working, and you do the things that do, because you give more value to people that way. And when people see those gifts in action, they want to feed that, they want to make use of that. And so you eventually get to where the kind of, if you kept good boundaries around yourself, you end up doing the kind of work that really keeps you motivated. Well, that book, he's not a Christian, but that book totally inspired me. And I thought, what he's missing, or what I would be missing with just that combination, is knowing that the one who created me and who can see all the connections that need to be made around me were leading me to use those gifts and be in those situations, where I'm motivated. And so I talk to God, obviously, because I do that a lot.
Yes.
Like,
What? Don't we all? Don't all of us Christians do that? Or we at least we should.
well, it's good conversation. And I'm just like, Lord, help me express this well, but also teach me more about how to use that combination of gifting and motivation and listening to you and letting you lead. There's an old book that I enjoyed called Experiencing God, which really inspired me to let God lead every step of the way, to really jump in keep your eyes open or your ears open, whatever, for what he's doing, and join him in his work. And so I put that along with the Gay Hendricks idea of living in your zone of genius, and came up with activities at the end of each chapter for Option Ocean that would help the reader progress through that process of discovering what they love, what makes them want to get up and go, and what doesn't. And also at the same time, paying attention to the gifts of the Spirit, the love, joy, peace, patience, aligning themselves with God so that they could notice what God is doing around them and really be part of that.
Wow. And I love that. Personally, I may not be able to follow the activities as stated in the book, but I'm going to keep working through this book. I'm just on day 3, so I couldn't read it in one sitting. But I'm going to keep working this, and I have created a brand new journal for this book.
Oh, I'm so excited. That just makes me so happy.
Yes, I've started journaling because I found, and I don't know if you found this to be true too, but if I date every entry, like such and such day, such and such, today is Friday, or today is Tuesday, June 25th, 2019, for example. And if I were to do that every day, I tried that at first years ago, but I felt guilty because I wasn't writing on a certain day. And then I discovered after a very rough spot in my life, because I have gone through some verbal and emotional abuse and among other things, but through a rough patch, in my life, that journaling, just allowing the thoughts to flow, write when I want to write, not try to keep it formulaic. Nobody sees it but me. So, and in one my initial journal actually turned into from a it's expressive writing for healing and reflection. It's actually toward the end of it has turned into a scene dump and brainstorming, among other things.
Fantastic.
So I've got journals for a lot of different things.
Do you feel? I'm sorry. Go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
I'm sorry. Do you feel that? Do you journal a lot too?
I was gonna say I journal when I want to, and that's long been a thing for me because I love to look back at my journals and see things that I've totally forgotten about in my life because I live at a pretty fast pace, even dreams that I forgot about. But and quotes from books that I've read and ideas for dreams that I have. So I do journal but I've never, and I date things, but I don't try to do it every day because like you, when I was trying to do it every day, it became a burden. And so it's so much more fun when your journal is just a friend that you really enjoy spending time with. I wonder
Right.
though, you said something there that made me respond in my heart. You talked about having gone through that verbal and emotional abuse, and I totally can relate to that. And there's actually a chapter in this book where I talk about some of that. And I kind of had to deal in my own life with recognizing that I'm not just a high achiever. There's a part of me that feels like I'm never enough. And I, have had over the last several years to really come to grips with that. And I wonder, have you experienced that in your own life where you had to
Yes.
deal with the fact that you are
Oh,
enough?
I'm sorry.
No, that's all.
Believe you me, forgiving myself was one of the hardest things I've done, and that's what I wrote in the letter to myself. Forgiving myself is going to be one of the hardest things you'll ever do, and in your life. Forgiving others can sometimes be easier than forgiving yourself. I had to do that. I'm gonna. Did you find music to be a source of healing? Because I sure did.
So much. I was sexually abused as a child and, also had some verbal abuse. And there was a singer named Julie Miller who sang about sexual abuse in a beautiful way, very godly woman. And I just, one of her albums in particular was a continuous source of healing and venting for me over about a 6-month period where God helped me come to a forgiveness, place of forgiveness.
Right.
What music has been helpful for you?
Well, it's not. Well, some of it's the Christian music, but that was not all. There's one particular late great country artist that I turned to because there are songs of his that just resonated with me.
Who?
Dan Seals.
Yes. Oh, I like Dan Seals from Seals and Croft.
Yeah, no, that was Jim. That's his brother.
Oh,
You think in England Dan and John Ford Coley. Yes, people get that mixed up. I did the YouTube research because I was curious about him, and I did some internet research, and I've watched the YouTube videos. So yeah, I kind of got to know. Yeah, because there's yeah.
That's awesome.
And what's a good rain? Even though it's a story song, it wasn't just. It's about a farmer, but it wasn't that. It was the not only the words themselves may not have been the whole thing, but it was that sense of comfort, that sense of it's like turning to an old friend, and let's just say God blessed me with a spiritual experience that I won't go into because there are a lot of people who don't understand those experiences. So yeah.
Boy, isn't it nice though that we don't have to understand it to appreciate it? You know,
Right.
he, God sometimes takes us to places that would make us sound like lunatics sometimes if we express them, but there's a big reason that Christianity is still so precious to so many people, and it has nothing to do with logic.
Mm-mm.
There, and God uses a much bigger perspective than we are even capable of,
He knows
and
the bigger
a
picture.
toolbox than we could possibly realize he has. You know?
He knows the bigger picture before we do.
Yes, yes.
And sometimes I will. There was one that England Dan and John Ford Coley did, and this was after my first marriage. My daughter's father. I'd had a really rough day after taking her back to see him, and there was this song. I was looking for something on YouTube because I was feeling like I was in a slump, and there was this song by England Dan and John Ford Coley that just I stumbled on it on YouTube, and it was like they were singing directly to me. It's called "Beyond the Tears."
Really, beyond the
Right.
tears. Like
Right,
that up.
because it's a love song, but it's basically it was like God was telling me there's joy behind your pain. There's sun behind the rain.
Oh, I just like that.
You got to find that song. You got to find that. I'm telling you. I stumbled on it at a time when I needed it most. And he also has a song. Dan Seals also has a song called "Those" that really resonates with me. And I'm not going to give you all the lyrics, but he says if those who are what is it? Oh gosh, I'm drawing a blank. But anyway, basically, if those who are up and feeling stronger now could help those who are about to fall, basically, he was saying that the world would be a lot better place for living and more forgiving if those who've been, who are stronger because of their life lessons could help those that haven't gone through that yet.
It's so true. And sometimes we don't, we try to jump in and help before we completely understand what we've been
Right,
through.
right,
And we can cause damage to other people because of our skewed perspective. If I've recently been divorced and I'm bitter, then I can try to rescue someone else who I think is in a bad marriage, when in reality I'm not understanding fully. So we need God to guide us when we're helping other people. A lot of times when I meet with someone, I'll pray beforehand, Lord, help me to say what you would say and no more and no less, because I don't want to add Kristi into the mix and mess things
right,
up.
right.
But so right, if we can just, instead of trying to hide or be surface people, if we can just be real and honest with people about what we've been through, it's amazing how many times we'll discover that God put us in their path because they're going through it.
Right, right.
Do you think
So
sometimes people are afraid of the responsibility, as though if I open up and try to help someone, then I'm going to have to be the one to fix them?
maybe are they afraid of rejection because they're afraid of somebody. And this is another podcaster I listen to. Her name is Charlotte Lewis. Her podcast is called the I Had to Change. It's I Had to Change the podcast because she was talking about this yesterday Sunday on her. Well, I think she did it Saturday night, but I listened to it Sunday. And she was talking about people are so afraid of rejection. They're afraid to reach out because they're afraid that people are gonna those in need are gonna push us away. Push them away. That's why we're so afraid to reach out to people.
Yeah. So on the one hand, you've got people who are afraid of rejection, and on the other hand, you have people who I believe might be afraid of the responsibility. And on both sides, I don't know that we always recognize that we help each other, we lift each other up, but we aren't each other's source of healing. God is the only one who is the source of healing. We're there just to be his hands in that moment, to be his listening ears, his heart right there in that moment. And he's going to use way more than us to touch that person's life. And being vulnerable even if we might get rejected, could actually be a pivotal point for someone to break free from being shallow or from hiding. Could actually help to draw them out and encourage them, tell them it's okay to be real.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay, so tell me a little bit about what inspired your podcast.
Oh, sure. A lot of the stuff that we're talking about, actually. The first book that I did was called Wisdom Better Than Wishing, and it was based on Proverbs, because I am one of those people that really enjoys getting into the real stuff with people. And I've had to learn that God is the source of their healing. I can't fix people, you know what I mean? I can just be there for them. But I really enjoy people who are real with me and you know, tell me what's been going on or what they've been through and trying to help them. And because I've needed that so much in my own life. And Proverbs gives us such a good foundation of, you know, every aspect of life, just kind of a wisdom foundation so that we can live with less regret and better relationships. And so I started the podcast, or I started the daily devotionals back in 2016 with just Proverbs. It was just a daily proverb for probably 6 months before I moved into other things. What I discovered was that it was it became a good way for me to need to be accountable. Every day I was doing something towards, you know, sharing what I felt like God had put in my heart. And, you know, Monday through Friday I was. And so it kept me accountable, but it also became, in 2017, I prayed, Lord, you know, I need less work and more productivity. And so I asked for synergy. I'm like, Lord, you know, all these things that I'm doing, help them to synergize. And so I switched from doing Proverbs to doing Matthew, because I have another devotional book in progress called Imagine. And I used the daily devotionals that I had with God to create the daily devotionals on One Moment Wiser, and begin basically fleshing out the material for Imagine. And that went on for several months, almost a year. And then, and I've used that for different things to kind of flesh out the ideas that will eventually be in the devotional, but also to give other people some encouragement and wisdom each day, and to keep me accountable. And that became, in last year, a podcast where I'm doing the daily devotionals on Facebook and YouTube, but in the podcast, I'm actually interviewing, you know, doing longer interviews where people who I've met through those daily devotionals share their lives, share the little bits of wisdom that they display in their own lives in practical ways. It's been really neat.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah. So okay, now we're gonna switch from the podcast and Facebook and YouTube. So before we do that, do you think your podcast, do you feel that you have your podcast and your Facebook and YouTube devotionals, you feel that's part of a ministry that God's called you to do?
I very much feel like it's part of the ministry. There have been a couple of times when I've gotten overly focused on someday making a living at it. And that is still something that I would like to be able to do, because it would give me so much more time to do a bunch of other things that God has put in my heart. But when I lose sight of the fact that this is a ministry, then it becomes a burden. And when I switch back and go, oh, wait a minute, this is you and me, God, having fun on a daily basis, you teaching me and us reaching out to help, you know, to encourage people. And when I keep that as my focus, then it's something I want to do on a regular basis. And so, yeah, it's a ministry, not just to other people, but to myself, you know, to my own heart. Now, eventually, you know, I would like since I've started doing the writing courses, and I have had so much fun teaching.
Oh yeah.
That eventually I'm thinking I might start, or I don't know whether I'm going to start my own podcast to help people write, or if I'm just going to work with people who already have wonderful things like you, because you do this on a regular basis.
Right.
And so much good material. So, it'll either be something I do or something I partner to do, because I have really, it's like playing with the toys God gives us when we get
Right.
so much fun and share it with other people,
And let me know if you need some help, because like I said, I'm learning as I go, but if I don't know something, I will research it.
I will, because you have already taught me some things that I'm going to implement. So I appreciate that.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you a really fun question before we get into the before we get into the resources part of this. So if you could have a conversation with or be educated by anyone in your field, anyone, past or present, who would that be and why?
Oh, no, past or present. That's a tough one. Okay, so I have all right. I wrote this country song a long time ago called Porch. Christian, I guess, gospel, country, bluegrass kind of sound.
Yeah.
But anyway, the idea of porch is that I can't wait to get to heaven where I can sing with David on God's front porch. King David has just ministered to me so profoundly all my life. And to know that he was a musician who sat out by a campfire when he was on the run with his guys, just sitting around playing music and worshiping God. I can't wait to meet him and do that same thing. I think that is the top of my list. But there's an author named Philip Yancey. And
I've heard of
when
him.
my first husband ran away to California, a friend of mine gave me a book called The Jesus I Never Knew. And I was so lost. My whole future, my whole identity, all of my plans had vanished. Because when we were married, I was so young. When we were married, I thought that being a wife was about being his second skin. I did everything to make myself portable so that he could achieve his dreams, and I left my own behind. And when he left, I had nothing. I had no idea what to do, and I was incredibly insecure. But this friend gave me the book Jesus I Never Knew, and something about that book awakened in me a desire that I'm living today. I knew that someday, and I knew I wasn't ready then, I didn't have the understanding then, but I knew that someday I would want to write books to help people connect with God, to help people understand who he is and his love and his companionship. And so someday when I began writing songs, I sent a copy of one of my songs to Philip Yancey, and he wrote me back, and I ran around the house squealing like a little kid. And so someday I think it'd be neat to just cook dinner for him and his wife and hang out.
Yeah, I've heard of him. I haven't read any of his stuff yet, but I heard of him. Speaking of Dan Seals, after I found out he passed away, and after I moved back home, from my first marriage, I actually, because this one woman had a Dan Seals fan site up, and I wrote a letter to his family and sent it to her and asked her to send it down to them for me. But I wrote a letter telling them how much his music meant to me.
That is so precious.
I never heard back, but that was okay.
Yep.
At least they know.
Absolutely. Oh man, I can't imagine holding it. I saw several people at my grandpa's funeral, and knowing that they loved and respected him meant so much to me. I can't imagine getting a letter from a complete stranger telling me how much they meant. The person who meant so much to me meant to them.
Wow, that would be amazing. That would just be, but authors and I'm sure musicians too, but authors get them all the time.
Yep. And I don't think we've gotten so used to social media posting. Everything's so easy and quick. I don't know how often we sit down and take the time to thank somebody for an impact they've had on our lives in writing. And I don't know, that reminds me of a couple of letters that I need to get written.
Well, I did it in email format, but still, the sentiment was still there.
Exactly. Well, an email is still going to be better than, a tweet,
A
right?
quick tweet, yeah, exactly. But see, I wasn't on Twitter then.
Yeah.
And besides, I don't think he had a page on Twitter. I haven't looked. But anyway, that's
How cool is that? Oh, that's neat.
Yeah, I haven't looked, but yeah, I just thought I'd share that.
As a writer, you know that you just want somebody's life to be touched by the stuff that you've written.
Right.
Yep.
So why not? I'll have to tell you when we do my interview, when you do your interview with me.
Yes.
I will have to tell you how he inspired a scene in A Journey of Faith.
Ooh, I can't wait to hear that.
Yes, I will have to tell you that, but yeah.
Uh-oh, that means our listeners will have to listen to another podcast.
Yeah, I know, right?
The tragedy of tragedies.
Right. Right. Of course. I mean, I could repeat it twice, but what's the fun in that, right?
I almost asked you to do that, and then the part of me that's like, no, we're learning to delay
Exactly, delay the inevitable. Surprises. Keep them on their toes.
There's a difference between being a teacher and being a storyteller, and I'm trying to internalize that difference because I've been in the corporate world for so long. I've been teaching other people that I get right to the point, and here's the 10 things you need to know, that kind of thing. But being a storyteller, you can't do that. You have to draw the reader in and keep them following that story and make them enjoy the process as you slowly unravel the story. And I keep reminding myself that I need to let people wait for things.
Right. Oh man, I am the stellar opposite. I'm a storyteller learning how to be a teacher for the podcast.
Awesome.
Right. I've got to find these tips and things, and I listen to other people going through the same journey with their tips and tricks. I'm like, okay, some of this doesn't work for me, but I got to find out what works for me and what can help other, especially new authors, aspiring authors, because they're going to need the initial information, like the story development. Ooh,
because not everything works for everybody. But
right.
You're exactly right. You find out what works for you, but you had to hear about it first, right?
Right. And all the gurus may say this works, that works, the other works. Well, but they claim that it's supposed to work for everybody, but not everything works for everybody. And I don't have a newsletter, so I don't follow all the advice of the gurus. I have a blog, but I don't have a newsletter. My blog is part of my website because I would have to do graphics and all this kind of stuff. Although I do have an email discussion group. Which is, if anybody wants to join, I'm not going to give out the full website because it is a bit long and I don't remember exactly, but if you send a blank email to Ann Wright's Inspiration plus subscribe at groups.io, and then all you have to do is reply to the email that you get, and it'll let me know that you've subscribed.
Oh, that's really handy.
Yeah. That's all people have to do.
That's a neat shortcut.
Yep. And it's more of a discussion group because I update people, but I also try to get discussions going because I'm one of these people. I like the conversation. I like to get inspired by other people. But you just gave me an idea. And I was thinking about this, and I'm going to have to write this down in my notes or in my journal somewhere or something. Take my character tips, my character development tips, maybe research them a little bit more, and talk about my experiences with it, and maybe it doesn't have to be a long one, but maybe do a short ebook. But I'm gonna have to pray about that first, because like I said, my nonfiction for longer writing is not, it falls flat. It does.
Completely. You know, though, what I'd love to see is I've been listening to the master. Oh, what's that thing called? Masterclass.
Yeah.
I got the masterclass, and I've been listening to authors share their own writing methods. And one of the things that I've really enjoyed is some of these authors, I haven't really read their material, but as they share their methods, they share examples from their own material. And I'm like, ooh, I need to read that. And it's been kind of cool. I'm like, oh, and that's what I liked about Philip Yancey too. Even in his books about God, he dropped in quotes from people that I'd never read before. And I was like, oh, new book, I've got to get it. And so that's been kind of neat. I'd love to see examples from your own writing so that other people would realize just how cool it is.
Oh yeah, I'm not good at reading them. I mean, I could, but I'd have to practice them. But I talk about my writing. I don't actually quote from it, but I do talk about some of the things that I'm working on. And I throw in little teasers for Journey to the Mountaintop, which is the sequel to A Journey of Faith. I throw in little teasers to kind of because I plan on getting that published this fall. So, and if you guys don't get Journey of Faith now, you're going to be lost when Journey to the Mountaintop comes out. Pardon me for the shameless plug, but anyway.
I need it. So Journey of Faith, they can get that on Amazon, right?
Yeah, A Journey of Faith, A Stepping Stones Mystery. You can get it on Amazon. You can get it on Smashwords, iBooks, or Apple Books now, Barnes & Noble, Scribd, different places. You can also get it in print from Lulu, or you can try to request that your favorite bookstore get the print version.
Now that's pretty nifty. I love mysteries. I really do. I just took a month off and didn't do any business except for my daily devotionals, which I had pre-planned. And I read 4 mysteries.
Wow.
Cool. And just totally relaxed. That's my downtime.
And it's A Journey of Faith, A Stepping Stones Mystery.
Mystery.
Yep. Okay, so where can people find you online?
Oh, sure. So my website is One Moment Wiser. It's the number 1 moment, moment, wiser, wiser.com. And honestly, if you go to Twitter or Facebook or YouTube or your favorite podcast source, you can look up One Moment Wiser and find me there. So we've got the daily videos on YouTube and Facebook, and I've got the blog and the videos and the books all on my website. And then the books, you can go to my website to get to the books, or you can just go straight to Amazon, like if you're a Prime member, or your local bookstore, Barnes & Noble, and basically all over the world, whatever the online or brick and mortar bookstores are, you should be able to ask for Option Ocean or Wisdom Better Than Wishing.
Cool. Okay, so speaking of publishing, did you independently publish your books, or did you have a publisher do them for you?
I used what they call a vanity publisher. Now, he actually, the publishing company I use is a worldwide, they do worldwide distribution and everything that a big publisher would do, but you pay up front for the cost.
Oh, girl, you made a mistake.
No, I actually did a lot of thinking about it before I did it the first time. And this time around, I thought I was going to skip the publishing process and just do it myself. But I have just gotten so much help from my publisher. He just good advice, good discussions about things. I'm always learning from him. So, I didn't have to spend a fortune, thankfully. It was just it wasn't anything to sneeze at, but it wasn't what I've heard some people have spent. And I retained all the rights, and we work really well together. So yeah, eventually I may get brave enough to just use what, Create Space or something like
No,
that?
Create Space is no longer. You either use KDP Print, which you're not going to get in the bookstores with KDP Print. You can use Lulu. You'd have to buy your ISBNs, but you can use Ingram Spark, and they charge you to upload unless you get a free promotion. Or you can use a hybrid publisher like I'm doing for my other 3 books, which were Electric Eclectic, but now they're not going to be for reasons between the founder of the Electric Eclectic brand and the publisher, which I won't get into here for confidentiality. But
what is hybrid publisher? So what's the difference between that and a vanity publisher?
Okay, so what a hybrid publisher is you have some parts. It's like half traditional, half indie, which they do the cover, they do the editing. You have to write the descriptions, your title. Sometimes they'll change the title or the blurb if they feel it's appropriate. They give you first choice on the title, but yet you make the final decision on what book goes up. You get to look it over and make that decision. They do the pricing and everything, and like Crimson Cloak, they advertise for you too. But some of the hybrid publishers, some don't do that. But yet, yeah.
So that's a lot of the same thing. Well, I have a lot more creative control with mine, but I do get good suggestions. So Peter, the guy who runs the publishing company that I work with, Total Publishing and Media. What is it? Total Publishing and Media. Yeah. I was like, oops.
Oh, okay.
I just know him by Peter, but he makes suggestions. Like when we price the book, he's like, here's what, books are going for. Here's where I think yours would fall into the range. When we do the blurb on the back, because the blurb is such an important part of a book, he gives me suggestions, or I'll send him something and he's like, here, what if we did this? And he's got pretty good ideas there. So, and then there have been some times where, like the cover, I've sent him my ideas for the cover, and we've ended up actually both books, because I do a lot of graphic design for my ads and stuff. Both books, we've ended up using pictures that I had, but his cover designers, made them work for the actual book cover. So.
Yeah, and I know the blurb is really, it's the hardest part to write too. But the reason I was thinking you made a mistake paying up front, which you show me now that you didn't, but I've had 2 bad experiences with that. So yeah, that's why I'm like, I wouldn't have done that, but because you're actually getting the good help, it was actually worth it for you. But even a lot of authors say you shouldn't have to pay to publish.
A lot of authors say that. I don't know that they all have done much research on it, but I have talked to some people who've paid way too much, gotten broken promises, or lost their own rights. And so I was, I was real careful what I got. And still, like I said, it's not free for any, by any means. But I was real made sure I found a publisher that would let me keep my rights. I can publish this book in any form that I want to. I'm not indebted to this publisher at all. And, even the digital copy, I can distribute that, when he sends me my proof copy, basically, I could distribute that if I wanted to. And I've used it for review copies and stuff. So I was, and I can use any part of my book. So the rights are a super important thing. I knew someone who went with a vanity publisher and lost her rights to her book. And I was like, oh man, I would have
No, and I didn't lose the rights, but my second publisher, they didn't do much advertising. They didn't do they didn't do the best job of editing. I had to change that. The editor didn't leave me comment. Yeah, we don't want to talk about gripes of publishing, but like I say, be careful. Don't jump at the first chance you get.
Absolutely. And know that there's going to be some frustrations with anything you do, but boy,
Yep.
oh boy, get a lot of opinions from people who've really worked with the different publishers or worked in the different methods. I know one girl who's done everything online by herself, and she's done a spectacular job. She's has a friend who's her editor, but basically, she's never gone through a publisher, but she is such a networker that her marketing is just like magic. I mean, it's just everybody knows who she is. So she sold like, I don't know, 1,000 copies the first day her book came out. I am not that person.
No, I know that would be I would love to have done that. Although I've sold more buying them and ordering them and distributing them to local stores and selling them. I've done one book signing and then got another one coming up soon. Hopefully, we'll talk about that more when you do my interview. But and then I've sold them to family members. And I've sold more just doing that than I have off of Amazon. And I self-published it the second time. I actually ended the contract with that publisher and got a friend of mine. I paid her to format, and she did I had the JPEG cover. She did the actual PDF cover for me. I self-published it on KDP and KDP Print. I also self-published it on Smashwords, and I had another lady that I know. I paid her to do the publishing on Lulu. So, yeah.
Nice. And I love supporting fellow entrepreneurs. If there's someone who, wants to make a little extra cash using their skills, I am all about that. I think it's wonderful to give people a chance, to do that formatting when I know that formatting would just be hell for me. And to, do that editing when I know that I may be a good editor, but I still need that second set of eyes after I've stared at something.
Pro Writing Aid is another tool you might want to look at.
Yeah. So I think that's awesome that you actually used people you knew to do the work, and digital is all the way to go. You've got your stuff very reasonably priced, and it's right there available for viewing, on that Kindle or whatever. And that's where everybody's going.
Right, but I still get the paperbacks because I do have people that love the paperbacks.
Yeah.
And I still promote the paperbacks on Twitter and on my blog, and it's you go to the Meet the Author page on my website. My all my books down below my handwritten, the bio that I wrote about myself, all the books, the anthologies I've been in, everything is there. The Amazon links, the buy books are there on that page of my site.
Your artwork is really neat, and I'm wondering, if you don't mind me asking, how do you know what to choose?
People send me JPEGs with labels, so I know if it's a profile picture or it's a cover art. If it's a book cover or whatever. I have people label the stuff.
Okay.
And I just upload it to WordPress.
Okay, so you have somebody who understands what your story's about, and then they...
Oh, the artwork? For the books. You're not talking about for the website. You're talking about from the books. Actually, when I did A Journey of Faith, that cover was actually the original cover that the publisher I was talking about did, and he just allowed me to use that. He was going to charge me $99 for it, but he waived that, and he allowed me to use that. Yeah, because... long story.
But still, that's pretty cool because it was a good cover. And the other one, oh gosh, what's the name of that?
Intervision. That one.
That cover was awesome.
Actually, the guy that did that, like I was telling you about the Electric Eclectic Books brand, he did, and a lot of people don't like his fonts, but he actually came up with that cover.
That was a good cover. So I was like, whoa, she picked some good stuff.
No, I didn't pick it. I know what I want on my cover for A Journey to the Mountaintop, though. I do not want to, because I have the idea. I don't know what it looks like, but I have an idea in my head what I want for that. So, and I came to that revelation this morning. But the thing of it is that I get somebody else to do that for me.
And it's good to have people that you can trust to do a good job.
Right.
And that's, that comes down to finding out how other people have responded to their stuff, and whether they've met their promises. So still doing research on people, but yeah, you've been blessed with some good designers.
Right. But Intervision, I'm not, well, I'm telling you about me, and I should be waiting for your.
I am enjoying every minute of it. You know what? That's the beauty of your podcast, is it's always so conversational.
Right. But
I take walks around my neighborhood listening to your podcast, or like on my way to work, I'm listening. it's
oh boy, there's another story for your podcast. Yes, and it has to do with something I saw today on the group. Yeah. So I can tell it here, or we can wait till we do yours, or I can do both. I'll probably do it on both anyway. But what I was doing.
Go ahead.
Okay, so I will repeat this on yours. Yeah. But what happened was I was reading, Diane Ford had an article, a guest blog article on her blog, which I actually follow hers now. But it was basically, she was talking about her writing and how she was feeling the doubt and how Satan was getting to her because the publisher she picked got, she felt like, God didn't want her to write because, he wanted her to write, but he didn't want her words to go out there because the publisher she picked wouldn't take her, or she found out she was going to have to pay way more money than she would get back, and all this kind of stuff. And then she was walking out in her meadow. Okay, and I was going to do some writing, which I actually did. I was going to do some writing today. And for some reason, after reading that, I felt God sending me out into the front yard. I was going to sit on the front porch and try to get some inspiration there. I had to go find a shady spot near the porch, standing on the grass. And I'm like, I'm praying, I'm saying, Lord, what are you trying to show me out here? What about the story do you want me to see out here? Then a breeze comes blowing through. I remember playing outside with the breeze, and we've got wind chimes on the front porch. And I had turned, not with my back to the porch. I was that at first time, but then I turned to the side, facing the wind, and the chimes were tinkling right in my ear, and it was like part of the story. It was like alive, 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 and then the other little one was like, "Go find her, find her, find her," and I'm like. Then the story started coming to me, and I'm like, okay, Lord, I know why you sent me out on this grassy patch.
Oh my gosh, I love it. I love that you start your podcast with the wind chimes, because I could stay outdoors for just ever and never come in.
I sit on the porch when I do my solo episodes.
Yeah.
Because the air conditioner, the app, when I'm recording on the phone, it will pick it up. And it's kind of loud, but I like sitting out on the front porch too. So I go out on the porch to do my solos, and that's why the wind chimes actually get thrown into the back. And I'm sure you heard a truck yesterday. Yep. You're riding that Jake brake. I'm keeping it real.
But being out in that wind with that grass, I'm just so there. You were describing it, I was like, yes,
Oh no, and that's one of that's the natural music. The God-given music, yes.
In the evening, there are tree frogs all around our house, and they're in different harmonies with each other, and I just love that.
Oh, I love that too. I love the sound of tree frogs. But city sounds, and I've lived in the city twice. Well, a couple of 3 times, but because I was went to Atlanta, to Canton, Georgia, and then to Athens for a while. Yeah. So living in the city, I don't find as much inspiration as I do out in the country.
Me neither. Anytime I'm out in the middle of nature. Now I have, begun to recognize just how much of God's work you understand when you're with people, because he's made us all so unique and different. But I still there's something that just happens to my heart when I'm out in the middle of nature, and it's just the birds and the cicadas and the tree frogs and whatever.
Yeah. Speaking of being out with people, I'll go to Walmart and pick up tidbits. If you go back to one of my earlier episodes, I did a writing prompt based on umbrellas and chairs. I heard this kid behind me, we were in the checkout lane at Walmart getting some stuff, And this kid says something about umbrellas and chairs. And I'm like, umbrellas and chairs. What can I do with that? And I wrote it down in a journal. And I ended up doing that as a writing prompt when I got home that night.
Oh,
This
how
was
fun.
like April, I think. Yeah.
Those are two things that you don't often, you don't see a lot in stories, or you don't think about, but I like quirky little things that take you in new directions in stories. That's one of the things that we talked about at Christmas idea grabbing writers workshop was, things like that are all around you in conversations if you just listen.
Right. It's like umbrellas and chairs, code 60, hooks and ladders, because I was listening to the podcast and my friend was saying something about a hook and needing a ladder, getting on a ladder and needing a new hook. And I thought, okay, hooks and ladders. That's another one of those random tidbits that just, you may not use it right now, but hey, don't forget to write it down. So when I'm out and about, I may not catch, random phrases everywhere and at every point, but when I go out, I will usually, especially at Walmart. Now, at Home Depot or at Sam's, you don't catch that, but at Walmart, you come across people saying all kinds of things.
Oh yeah, every conversation, or because there's such a huge variety of people whose lives are so different.
And not only that, people meeting their friends, and you like I say, you want an informal family reunion, go to Walmart.
That's awesome.
Here, yeah. But let's get back to the topic of writing because we have definitely gotten sidetracked. Well, I guess it does have to do with writing in a way. So tell me about your process.
Grabbing. What were you saying?
Okay, so tell me about your process. Are you a pantser? Yeah, a planner, a plotter, or a pantser? Or are you kind of what I call a planter, a plotter, a pantser with a plan? Oh, can't even talk now.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so and it's so funny. There's a garden shop down the street that spring is here. We're so excited. We wet our plants. I am. It's funny. It depends on what I'm doing. So with the devotional, I start out a lot of time with just my daily time with God and getting the inspiration. But then once I have an idea, I tend to plan it out somewhat. And then, I start out by the seat of my pants, and then at some point I have to sit down and really plan. With fiction, I'm trying to be more of a planner, but I've been more of a pantser so far. The more I realize things are easier to sit down and do if I have a little bit of a plan. Because if I don't, then I'm intimidated by, the thought of doing it. Something in me is like, oh, it would be so much fun to write, but then, the time comes and I'm like, oh, but I don't know what to do, what to say. And so if I have a little bit of plan there, then it's a lot easier for me to sit down and start.
Yeah. I do that too. I plot a little bit. I have a loose plot because sometimes I'll see ideas for new stories in dreams and it won't make sense at first. And then I'll go sit out on the front porch and brainstorm, and then it all comes together and I just write a loose plot, a loose plan, and then I start working from there.
Yeah.
And that's all systems go. So you have given me some writing tips, writing links. Would you like to share the story behind those?
Oh, sure. Let me just say one more thing while we're on the topic. As someone who is helping others write, I've had to realize, just like in my classroom at the corporate office where I work, I have a whole bunch of different kinds of learners, where I have some learners that really need all the details laid out, and I have other learners that really need action to happen. And so it's the same when I'm working with writers in these courses. And so it's been a blessing to teach in the corporate world and get to understand those different minds, because I understand as I'm teaching writers that some of them are going to need to go just on inspiration, like we did when we wrote the letter to our 18-year-old self and started praying. And then some of them are really going to need a structured format, like I did when I showed them, how many words we usually expect and what the order of things was, things like that. And so when you work with people, and you aren't determined that everything has to work the way it works for you, then you can end up learning to be a little more flexible, and also, helping, basically flexing to draw them along. You were talking earlier about that same thing, that, listening to what works for people, but then figuring out what works for you.
Right.
So it's been neat I've had to learn to be more of a plotter in some ways, and learn to make sure I allow the pantser flexibility when I'm working with other people on a project.
Right.
So you said, the links. So it was neat that you asked about resources, because one of the things I enjoy about your show is all the resources you share. I have taken so many notes. WritersDigest.com, or the Writer's Digest magazine. I got a subscription to Writer's Digest way back when I was like 22, when God was healing my heart from the childhood experience. And every time I got a magazine in the mail, back then it was just in the mail, I would just devour it and use all those different tips to write this fiction story that was kind of an expression of what I was going through learning to forgive. And so Writer's Digest, I learned more about the art and business of writing than in any class I've ever taken. And then Toastmasters, I have met more amazing people through Toastmasters. I learned a lot about, you wouldn't know from listening to me tonight, but I've learned a lot about not talking too much.
You know what? That's God doing this, not us. He's using us.
With Toastmasters, though, everything is timed and, usually short. And it helped me tremendously with the One Moment Wiser and other discussions. But the people is what it's really about. I've met so many encouraging, supportive, interesting, and get to, go to it kind of people who don't just talk about doing something, but actually get out there and do in Toastmasters. And then, so that's Toastmasters.org. So there's writersdigest.com and Toastmasters.org. And then mysexybusiness.com, which I know sounds shocking. It's not about being sexy at all.
No, you said you had a story to tell behind that one.
Oh my gosh. So this is, I don't know, just one of the neatest things that's ever happened to me. I met this girl named Kim in Toastmasters, actually, the first time I went to Toastmasters. And a few years later, I really got to know her. And she came to me one night, and we had a conversation that lasted until midnight in my driveway. And 2 weeks before that, I had put in my application to go back to college to finish my bachelor's degree, using something that I thought would get me ahead in the corporate world. And when I submitted that application, my heart broke. I just started bawling. And it's like the writer inside of me was like, what about me? Why are you giving up on us? And I'm trying to be logical, and I'm telling this writer inside of me, this will help us. It'll be okay. But it was at that moment that I realized something was, I was committing to spend 3 years of all my spare time to do something that would keep me, move me ahead in a place where I still wasn't doing what was in my heart. And it's a good place. I love my job. I love my company, but it isn't ultimately what I had wanted to do. And that was 2 weeks before Kim came over. And she came over this one night, And she said, I have this idea. I would like to help you and your friend Jennifer create a conference, because you speak well together, you work well together, and I just really believe that you need to have your own conference. And 2 years before that, I had told somebody at a conference, in a couple of years, I'd like to be doing what you're doing. But I had set all that aside thinking, well, I just need to go back to school and move ahead in the corporate world. And so that night, Kim and I talked for a while, and I told her what I'd been, planning to do. But the more, she was telling me basically everything I had wanted and dreamed of, but had absolutely no idea how to do. And she's a long-term businesswoman. She's been a businesswoman since she was 16. And she knew a lot of the stuff that I didn't know. And so I took a walk the next day. I called, or I didn't call into work, but I went to work, and then I talked to my boss and took the rest of the day off. And I sent a couple of messages to a couple of coworkers who pray for me. And within minutes, one of them was on the phone. And about the time that one and I had talked a little bit, the other one called me. And they prayed. And then I started driving. I was going to go to the woods where I always feel close to God. And instead, God turned me towards a park. He put this word in my head, cultivate. And I went to this garden where everything is manicured and cultivated, and they have, gardening classes and roses and, all that stuff. And it wasn't wild, but it was something that word was very clear in my head. And as I walked around, God gave me all these ideas for the conference, which we called A Rose in Bloom, and the ideas about how our spirits are cultivated. They're fertilized by a lot of the crap that goes in our lives, and they're pruned sometimes, and it's no fun. And sometimes the blooms fall off and we think everything is dead, but what's happening is the roots are gathering nourishment and the body is being protected. And we grow through that cultivation, and we grow stronger. And as I kind of figured, yes, I'm going to cancel my college application. By the time I got done walking, I just knew that I was going to cancel my application. And as I turned to leave, someone had written in chalk on the steps, "I will love you every step of the way."
Wow.
I know. I was just like, oh, wow. Thank you, Lord. And that has been such a change in my life, just taking the time. And I was asking God, I'm like, I don't want to do something just because I'm excited about it. I want to do something because I know you say it's the right thing to do, because you know what the future holds. But being able to trust him and choose, be open to hear, to that leading. Oh man, those words on those steps told me that I had made the right choice. And since then, so many of my dreams have come true. The things that I'm really passionate about. And what's funny is at my job, I've learned most of the stuff that I would have been learning in college. And my boss last December bought me a program to learn the rest of the stuff I'd have been learning in college.
So it worked out.
I know, so I'm working on that. So it was kind of neat. God, he always provides, and I think he really likes to do it in interesting ways, in ways that are very personal. So that's where the My Sexy Business thing came. Kim is the owner of My Sexy Business, and what she does after years of being a business owner, she realized she wanted to teach people how to build businesses that weren't a ball and chain, businesses that they enjoyed being part of and that were attractive to customers. And so she created My Sexy Business, and it basically teaches entrepreneurial skills. And I've learned a lot from her. I actually do a feedback session with her once a month now, for the other people in our club.
Wow, that's amazing. Because I took my writing instead of working for somebody else, other than freelance clients every once in a blue moon. But
Hmm.
anyway, I took my author world and I turned it into a business. It's slow going at first. It's slow going right now, but I mean it's a start. So what I'm
Yeah.
doing is turning my passion, my calling that God has given me, turning it into a business.
Yeah, finding that genius zone, right? That
Right.
for your gifts, and you're still, you're using your gifts and you're motivated, and God's given that to you. And that is really cool. And we live in a time where there are so many resources for ordinary people like us, that just want to, like I say, ordinary people. Honestly, ordinary people sit and run their TVs all night long and don't actually work.
Yeah, exactly.
Um,
But extraordinary people like us sometimes work late into the night.
yeah, I mean, we know we have to do what's in our hearts, and there's so many neat resources for us. I've enjoyed learning about some of the resources that you like, and some of the problems with resources that have frustrated you, because there are people out there who aren't writers but who are developers who need to know about these challenges
Hmm.
and the benefits. So I look forward to talking about that on our podcast.
Right. All right. Well, on that note, I'm going
Mhm.
to close this out. So we challenge you today to go out there and read to get inspired. Write something inspiring and share your creation with the world. For when you've touched one life, you've touched 1,000. Thanks for joining us on Inspirational Journeys, and have a blessed night.